Over the past 225 years, there have been multiple and distinct sales personalities and personas. Why? How has that happened? In today's episode, I'm going to take you through multiple sales personas starting from really around the year 1800 through today, and a little bit of prognostication around what that next sales personality might have to look like. So, in today's episode, season number 5, episode number 9, we're going to talk through 225 years of evolving sales personas.
There is nothing new in the world of sales except for the history you do not know. Welcome to the Sales History Podcast, bringing the brilliant and sometimes strange minds, methods, and ideas from the sales profession's past with applications to today. Here is your host, the best-selling author of 2 books, with a 3rd coming in January of 2026. CSP speaker, trainer, and nerd, Todd Caponi.
Selling has been practiced since the beginning of time. From the time of bartering and pre-civilization, selling was likely conducted in a skillful way throughout the centuries. The deepest stamp of our current idea of selling is from around 1800 to today. Even more significant was the era of industrial expansion that followed the Civil War here in America. However, if you look at the salespeople of the past 150 years, I think we can look at it as a study of how we should be thinking about selling today. There was an evolution that took place and a pile of different sales personas that I thought would be helpful to understand. So let's start with the peddler. In the early days of the first settlements, especially here in the U.S., the peddler made their appearance. They traveled from house to house and tribe to tribe, armed with a pack and riding a wagon. When commercial society was largely unorganized, the peddler performed a vital function in the distribution of goods. In his 1823 book, Travels in New England and New York, Timothy Dwight discussed the peddler by saying, quote, "He wanders into the interior country, calls at every door on his way, and with an address and pertinacity not easily resisted, compels no small number of the inhabitants to buy." Writing in 1833, Thomas Hamilton wrote in a book that I found from 1927 called Hawkers and Walkers in Early America, quote, "The whole race of Yankee peddlers in particular are proverbial for dishonesty." The door-to-door salesperson has never been able to overcome this reputation established by these peddlers hundreds of years ago. Salespeople of this type, the door-to-door salespeople, have tried to convince their prospects that the irritating methods, they're not me, but most people I know aren't answering the door to find out. So that started many years ago. We then moved into the era of the drummer. The drummer operated initially in large cities, but following the Civil War, they really extended their reach everywhere. They were employed to wait at hotels or other places frequented by their potential prospects. In an 1856 book called Leading Pursuits and Leading Men, Edwin T. Friedley wrote, quote, "Many jobbers keep one or more young men as drummers at each of the principal hotels. While most of the employees of their establishments do more or less service of this sort, they watch for customers as a cunning animal does his prey." The drummer of the period 1840 to 1880 followed much the same approach as the peddler did a half century earlier. What's interesting is how welcome the drummer was in town. Friedley went on to explain that, quote, "Wherever he goes, he is met with cordiality. Like all travelers, he is full of anecdotes and has at his command the rarest of news of the time. None are more glad to see him than the shopkeepers' wives and daughters. To these he imparts the most recent scandal and the latest fashions, affording them subjects for gossip until his next visit to the town. To the tradesman, he lauds his samples with all the eloquence and ingenuity of which he is capable. He seldom leaves without making considerable bargains. Now, following the Civil War in 1865, the number of drummers in the United States grew in a crazy way. It went from around 8,000 to over 90,000. A writer at the time discussed that, quote, the commercial traveler must increase because more business is wanted, because the country is very rapidly developing and markets extending, and because it has been pretty thoroughly demonstrated that business cannot be done in any other way. In a 1931 book, The Principles of Selling by H. Nixon, he wrote this, quote, to their generation, the drummers were a romantic crew. In the backwoods and frontier communities, these strangers from the cities, with their urban polish, their black cigars, their doubtful morals, their collection of piquant stories, and their persuasive manners, made a deep impression. Legend grew up about them. They came to stand in the public mind as symbolic of a certain type of selling based on personal appeals, entertainment, gifts, exploitation of passion, and weakness. Following 1900, the drummer really became known solely as a commercial traveler. Now, commercial travelers have been around for a while too, but given their customers no longer needed them for entertainment or news, they really did just become the commercial traveling salesperson. Now, the next that kind of got injected in here really is signified by P.T. Barnum and the confidence man. At the time, selling often became a battle of wits, as recognized all the way back to the Roman Empire through the term caveat emptor, or let the buyer beware. Nobody symbolized this idea more than P.T. Barnum, who his philosophy was that of a trickster. His reputed slogan was, quote, there's a sucker born every minute. Early retail transactions were represented by an absence of fixed prices. Many retailers were known to toss a little sand in the sugar or a little chicory in the coffee just to increase the weight. Now, oddly enough, chicory in coffee is like the new trend, but back then it was made to make the coffee weigh more. In the 1923 book, Barnum himself is quoted as saying, our cottons were sold for wool, our wool and cotton for silk and linen. In fact, nearly everything was different from what it was represented. The customers cheated us in their fabrics. We cheated the customers with our goods. Each party expected to be cheated, if it was possible. Our eyes and not our ears had to be our masters. We must believe little that we saw and less that we heard. Now, Nixon, in his 1931 book, went on to say, commercial morality was at a low ebb during the period of 1860 to 1900. He added, quote, the philosophy of the times was of exploitation. Business was ruthless and frequently unscrupulous. Selling methods merely reflected the temper of the people. Now, this led to the emergence of another type of salesperson, the confidence man. They were well-dressed, impressive-looking, a smooth talker, and careful to be both unscrupulous but within the law. They sold essentially worthless stock, patent rights, gold bricks, and other items not worth their cost. Now, eventually, we arrived at a place that still defines what most people think of when they hear the word salesperson. That is the high-pressure salesperson. The Industrial Revolution took place, and this led to the development of machines that could produce large quantities of products. The country was also undergoing a massive expansion, including the opening of the West, so manufacturing was essentially meeting demand. However, eventually the machines were producing more products than the market needed, and idle machines are expensive. Advertising spend went up, training salespeople to be assertive increased, and the theme for the best salespeople were the ones who could, quote, make them buy. Nixon was quoted as saying, by his dominating methods, he left a trail of irritation behind him so that his work became harder and harder. That goes back to what I always say, that the long game wins the long game, but it also wins the short game too, over time. The short game may win the short game, but it crushes the long game. And Nixon was seeing that through these high-pressure salespeople back in the 1920s and 1930s. From there came this service mantra, and it goes back, but then goes to today. And here's what I mean. As early as 1842, there were some retailers trying to throw out the old ideas of the peddlers, drummers, and confidence men. Some New York stores were advertising published pricing, one price for all, which was revolutionary versus the way everyone had been taught to haggle and bargain. It was that year, 1842, that Cyrus Hall McCormick, who invented the Reaper, gave a written guarantee with each one. John Wanamaker had adopted the same policy in his famous Philadelphia store, a return or money-back guarantee. They pointed the way towards the new concept of selling, which was expressed in a single word: service. So as the 1800s came to a close, the country was becoming more settled. Trade had been established, education standards were growing, and business ethics needed to coincide with the economic order. The GOAT of sales philosophers, as I always say, Arthur Sheldon, published the first known public course, and many others followed. Sheldon, in his 1911 book, The Art of Selling, said, quote, "True salesmanship is the science of service. Grasp that thought firmly and never let go." Now, Nixon, in that 1931 book, Principles of Selling, that I've referred to, had some profound things to say about the eras of selling. And I want to dig into that because I think it's fantastic, and it was what really called my attention to this episode overall. He started with this quote: "One of the most significant changes in the selling theory of our day is the gradual disappearance of what may be called the philosophy of exploitation. This theory assumed that the sole aim of selling was to secure the immediate disposal of goods and the greatest possible profit, without regard to the needs or wants or desires of the buyer. It originated in the cruder economic life of the past, when the struggle for existence was more an individual matter and where the weak and ignorant customer had little opportunity to fight back." Nixon went on to say, quote, "The man or woman going into selling today has to choose between the older definitions, which thought of salesmanship as the art of, quote, making people buy, and the more modern concept, which considers selling as the business of, quote, helping people buy. And there was one simple moral, which has guided the profession since its original existence as far back as humans roamed the earth. And it is this: the selling methods of any period grow out of the economic situation of the time." Now, of course, there are always laggards where old school methods persist in isolated spots or in specific industries. However, the majority of the profession has consistently been found to progress in step with the macro environment. Today, that, quote, the weak and ignorant customer, I find them to be few and far between. They're no longer powerless to fight back. With reviews on everything we do, buy, and experience pervading all things large and small, the ability to connect with peers, not only across the street, but across the globe, and the virality of bad experiences and actors in business and beyond, the majority of true professionals have shifted to a theory of customer conservation. Wilbur Hall wrote in his 1921 book, The Salesman's Kindergarten, quote, "It isn't enough nowadays for a salesman to wear a $90 suit and carry a half dozen Havana cigars in his vest pocket. He must have something above the collar, besides a pleasant smile and an easy delivery." Now, it's natural and human to be drawn towards the selfish satisfaction of our own wants and desires. It's unreasonable to expect salespeople to completely forget themselves and their own wallets. It's showing the salesperson that being far-sighted does not mean being altruistic or philanthropic. It serves the same purpose. The short game wins the short game, but it also wins the long game in this feedback economy. It's far simpler today to educate customers and then give them what they want, rather than trying to force or convince them against their better judgment. So today, what we have done, we have walked through the eras of sales since the early 1800s and watched this idea that, again, quote, the selling methods of any period grow out of the economic situation of the time. And going forward, as we continue to multiply this feedback economy, the as-a-service economy, where the deal is no longer the peak of the relationship, it is merely an early milestone on the path to having customers that not only buy, but they stay, they buy more, and they advocate for you. Service, I believe, will continue to be the mantra going forward, but that's just one person's opinion looking through history. What do you think? As always, I so appreciate your feedback, your ideas, your sharing, and the star ratings continue to go up. That's fantastic. I so appreciate it. I've got some more meaty episodes coming up. So as always, though, I so appreciate you listening in and giving this your time, and I hope you continue to enjoy it. All right. Thanks again.